Welcome to True Echo, the channel where powerful voices rise from silence, and the echoes of truth are louder than lies. Today we bring you a story that shakes the very foundations of justice, not because of what was done in darkness, but because someone finally had the courage to bring it to light. This is not just a courtroom drama. It's a reckoning, a transformation, and a reminder that dignity is not granted, it's demanded. Let's begin. The air was heavy that morning, not with heat or storm but with something colder. Something institutional. The kind of weight that doesn't press on your shoulders but on your soul. Judge Alexandria Hayes stepped through the towering glass doors of the Travis County Federal Courthouse as she did every day, without fanfare, without escort, and without her robe. She always entered the courthouse not as a symbol but as a person. Because symbols are easy to ignore. People are not. But on this day something shifted. The click of her heels echoed sharply across the lobby floor as she moved toward the security checkpoint. She was in her 40s, with silver and black coils pinned neatly against her scalp, her blazer crisp, her badge tucked beneath her lapel. She was, in every sense, the image of discipline and authority. That didn't matter. "Step out of line, ma'am." The voice was low but absolute. It sliced through the morning stillness like a blade. Not loud but laced with power, the kind that doesn't ask. It commands. Alexandria turned her head. Her dark brown eyes locked onto the officer. Square jaw, tight buzz cut, arms crossed, body armor slightly bulging under a navy blue uniform. Deputy Carl Briner. She recognized him. Not personally but by type. "I beg your pardon?" she asked, voice calm even. "You heard me. Step out." Random check. Behind her, attorneys and staff breezed through the checkpoint without question, plastic trays gliding down the conveyor belt. No one else was stopped. No one else looked like her. "I have credentials," she said, slowly reaching into her inner pocket and revealing the gold-embossed Department of Justice badge. Judge Alexandria Hayes. U.S. District Court. The younger female officer near the X-ray belt froze. Her eyes widened. But Briner didn't flinch. He snatched the ID from her hand and tucked it into his pocket like a receipt. "I'll hold on to that for now." Alexandria's face didn't move. But her jaw tightened. "I'll need that returned immediately." Briner smirked. "You in a hurry, sweetheart?" Sweetheart. The word landed like a slap, sharp and patronizing. But Alexandria didn't give him what he wanted. Not the flinch, not the fury. "Yes," she said. "I have court." Briner stepped back and motioned toward a hallway behind the main checkpoint. "You'll follow my procedure." It wasn't a request. Alexandria hesitated, not in fear but calculation. Two other officers fell into step behind her, eyes uncertain. Sheep not wolves? They knew this was wrong, but fear was easier than courage. The hallway was cold, sterile. A forgotten screening room with peeling linoleum, a lone metal chair, and a humming vent overhead. Alexandria's heels clicked as she stepped inside. "I do not consent to this search," she said firmly. "There is no legal cause for detaining me." "You're acting suspicious," Briner replied, circling her. "Suspicious of what?" He didn't answer. He didn't have to. He gestured toward the chair. "Sit." She didn't move. "You think you get special treatment, 'cause you look polished?" he sneered. Then nodded toward the clippers sitting on a tray. Alexandria's eyes narrowed. "What are you doing?" "Security protocol," he said, lifting the buzzing clippers. "Could be hiding something in that mop." "You touch me," she warned, "and you will answer for it." But he didn't stop. The clippers roared to life, a harsh electric hum. One of the officers pressed on her shoulder. And then it happened. The cold, buzzing teeth met her scalp. Thick silver coils tumbled to the floor. Then another. And another. Alexandria did not cry. She did not scream. She sat in that chair with fire raging behind her eyes, her fists clenched in her lap, her stare locked straight ahead. "She looks better already," one of the officers muttered. "Should have come in with respect," Briner said, brushing hair from his sleeve. 5 minutes later, she was alone again in the hallway. No apology. No badge returned. She retrieved it herself, from Briner's desk. She didn't fix her hair. She didn't stop to look in a mirror. She walked. Down the hallway. Past stunned clerks. Past portraits of powdered white men. Past echoes of silence and complicity. And then she entered Courtroom 4A, not through chambers, not in private, but through the main doors. The courtroom fell silent. Gasp. Wide eyes. Then stares. First at the uneven scalp. Then at the face. Cold. Measured. Fire forged into steel. She moved to the bench. Slipped on her robe. and faced the courtroom. No assistant moved to help. She didn't need help. She needed justice. "Is the docket ready?" she asked. A young clerk cleared his throat. "Yes, Your Honor." "Then let's begin." Because the courtroom had just learned a lesson it would never forget. They hadn't just humiliated a woman. They had violated the judge. And the reckoning had just begun. The courtroom remained frozen, not by order, but by gravity. Judge Alexandria Hayes didn't need to slam her gavel. She didn't need to raise her voice. The authority radiating from her wasn't borrowed from the robe or badge. It came from what she had just endured. And how she carried it. From the defense table, 3 men in pressed uniforms sat stiffly. Officers Jeremy Dorsey, Peter Valdez, and Andrew Lynn, the accused in a high-profile police misconduct case tied to a protest the year before. Their shoulders were broad, their faces stony, but none of them could meet her eyes. Alexandria took a slow breath and opened the case file. Preliminary testimony will proceed in Case 5489B, United States v. Officers Dorsey, Valdez, and Lynn. Murmurs stirred across the gallery. Reporters scribbled. A few court watchers glanced between the shaved scalp under the bench and the defendants. No one said it, but everyone felt it. The room had turned. The dynamics of power had shifted. "Before we begin," Judge Hayes said without looking up, "I'd like to address the court regarding a matter of internal concern." The silence returned, thick and electric. She raised her gaze and locked onto the man standing in the far corner, leaning stiffly near the courtroom wall, Deputy Carl Briner. His posture had changed. Gone was the cocky smirk, the puffed chest. His hands were clasped, white-knuckled, in front of him. His eyes tried to dart away but kept returning to the judges. "Deputy Briner," she said, voice cold and controlled. "Step forward." Every head turned. He didn't move. "I won't ask twice." He swallowed and took one hesitant step. Then another. He walked slowly to the center of the room where defendants normally stood. By the time he stopped, he looked less like an officer and more like a child caught red-handed. "State your full name for the record." "Carl Allen Briner." "How long have you served at this courthouse?" 15 years. Alexandria nodded once. Then picked up a manila folder. "And in those 15 years, how many times have you been accused of misconduct?" He stammered. I don't know. Would you like me to remind you?" She held up the folder. 12 formal complaints. All filed between 2009 and 2023. Excessive force. Verbal harassment. Racial profiling. Use of unauthorized procedures. In every case, the complainant was either a woman or a person of color. In many cases, both. A hush swept the courtroom. Not gasps, just the sound of people realizing what had been buried. And yet, Alexandria continued, not one of those complaints resulted in disciplinary action. Not one. Do you know why? Briner's mouth opened but nothing came out. Because they weren't investigated. Because they were suppressed. She tapped her pen once on the folder. The click echoed like a bullet casing on tile. "You thought I was just another woman you could intimidate. Another black woman walking into a building you thought belonged to you." Her tone never wavered. "You didn't ask my name. You didn't look at my credentials. You humiliated me in the name of procedure. You violated my rights under the guise of security. You stripped me of my dignity as if it were yours to take." Then she stood. "But what you failed to realize, Deputy Briner, is that I am this court. I don't report to you. I don't answer to you." She leaned slightly forward. "But today you answer to me." Gasps now. Audible ones. "Effective immediately," she said, turning to the bailiffs at the rear, "Deputy Carl Briner is to be taken into federal custody. He is to be held in isolation pending charges of assault, abuse of power, and civil rights violations under federal law." The bailiffs didn't hesitate. They moved in. "Wait. Wait, you can't." Briner's voice cracked as the cuffs clicked into place. But they could. And they did. He was led from the courtroom, once the enforcer, now the judged. No applause followed. No one cheered. Because what had just happened wasn't a spectacle. It was a shift in gravity. Alexandria returned to the bench, placed her hand gently on the polished wood, and sat. "The court will proceed," she said, her voice calm, firm. "This is not about vengeance. It is about truth." She nodded to the prosecutor. "Call your first witness." A young black woman in her 30s, hair straightened, heels sharp, stood. "The government calls Mr. Malcolm Trent." From the gallery, a man in his 40s rose slowly. Broad-shouldered, heavy-eyed, with a beard peppered with gray. He moved like someone carrying a burden older than his years. He took the stand. Raised his hand. swore the oath. Saturday. Mr. Trent, the prosecutor said gently, can you tell the court what happened on May 15th of last year? He nodded. My son Caleb went downtown with friends. Peaceful protest. No violence. Just signs and chants. He was 17. He paused. His hands twitched in his lap. I got the call at 6:12 p.m. They said he'd been tackled. Said he resisted. He didn't. He couldn't. His arms were behind his back. His voice cracked. When I arrived, they wouldn't let me near him. Said he was agitated. Said he was being dramatic. But I saw the blood. His shirt was soaked. He swallowed hard. His windpipe was crushed. Another hush swept the room. They kneeled on his neck. One of them, Officer Valdez, I think. He passed out. Right there. In the street. The gallery stiffened. Someone gasped. And the report, Trent said it was minor bruising. Said he was faking distress. Judge Hayes leaned forward, not to interrupt, but to witness. The prosecutor nodded. Thank you, Mr. Trent. He stood to leave. Then paused. Turned to Alexandria. I just want to know that someone's finally listening. She met his gaze. You've been heard. He nodded once. And walked away. The silence that followed was not emptiness, it was respect. Reverence. Judge Alexandria Hayes exhaled softly. Not from pain. From clarity. The reckoning had only just begun. When Alexandria re-entered the courtroom for the afternoon session, the energy was different. Tangible. Almost sacred. Word had spread. It wasn't just attorneys and court staff in the pews anymore. A second row of reporters had arrived. Local organizers stood silently at the back. Even a state senator's aide had taken a seat reserved for court clerks. The room wasn't just full, it was listening. Next witness, the prosecutor announced. Tanya Greer. From the side aisle, a woman emerged. Mid-50s. Crisp gray pantsuit. Short natural hair. Glasses perched neatly on her nose. But it wasn't her appearance that silenced the room, it was her presence. There was something unshakable in the way she walked. Like a woman who had spent decades being invisible and had finally decided to be seen. Miss Greer, the prosecutor said. What was your role at this courthouse? I worked here for 22 years, she said, her voice calm but not flat. Front desk. Then records. Eventually records supervisor. And during that time, were you ever made aware of complaints filed against Deputy Carl Breener? Tanya didn't hesitate. Yes. How many? Officially? Well, unofficially, at least 24. A murmur stirred through the courtroom. What happened to those complaints? Tanya turned her eyes to Judge Hayes. Something passed between them, not familiarity, not even solidarity. Recognition. Grief. They were mishandled, Tanya said. Some were marked resolved when they weren't. Others disappeared completely. Who gave those instructions? The question hung like a blade. Tanya took a slow breath. Judge Samuel Prescott. The impact was seismic. Gasp. Audible. Real. Some from people who had worked alongside him. Others from those who had idolized him. Judge Prescott, retired just 6 months prior, had been the courthouse patriarch. A mentor. A symbol of tradition. Why? The prosecutor asked softly. Tanya's voice cracked. He said it would undermine public trust. That it would make the courthouse look weak. Alexandria didn't blink. But inside something broke. Because she had heard those exact words before. Spoken to her. By him. You're exactly what the bench needs, Prescott had once told her. But tread lightly. Strength isn't noise, it's discretion. And like so many others before her, she had chosen to believe it. Did you ever witness Deputy Breener acting inappropriately? The prosecutor continued. Tanya's hands gripped the wooden stand. I watched black interns get searched twice as often. I watched women escorted out of rooms for asking the wrong questions. I watched victims report assaults only to be told to let it go. Her voice trembled. And every time I raised it I was told, that's just how it is. No one moved. Not even the stenographer. Tanya stepped down. But she didn't walk out like most witnesses. She paused just long enough for everyone to see her, not as a file clerk but as a witness to history. Alexandria stood. I'm calling a recess, she announced. 20 minutes. As the courtroom emptied again, a young reporter whispered to his colleague, she's not just running this trial, she's rewriting it. He didn't know she heard him. But she did. Back in chambers the air was heavy. Alexandria stood alone, staring at the darkening sky beyond the tall window. The light cast shadows across the carpet like scars. On her desk sat the confidential folder from the DOJ. The one with every sealed complaint. The one she had once hoped didn't exist. But it did. And now it bore the name of the man who had once mentored her. Prescott. She flipped through the pages. Stamped signatures. Margins scribbled with comments like, lacks merit, and resolved informally. At the very back of the folder was a memo she hadn't seen before. A note from Prescott to the head of courthouse security. Breener may be rough around the edges, but he keeps order, especially with certain groups. Best to leave well enough alone. Alexandria didn't weep. She didn't shout. She simply closed the folder and whispered, no more. Then came a knock. Her clerk peeked in again. Face pale. Voice small. Your Honor, someone from the Senate Judiciary Committee is here. They're requesting a formal statement on judicial oversight and the Breener incident. Alexandria nodded. Of course they are. Now that the cameras are on. One more thing, the clerk added. 2 retired judges and a former district attorney, they've just resigned. No press conference. All citing health reasons. Alexandria turned to her desk. Bring in the attorneys, she said. All of them. An hour later, the courtroom was packed beyond capacity. Fire code be damned. The air was tight. Alive. Law students had packed the front pews. Reporters sat on the floor. Community leaders stood shoulder to shoulder in the back. Some held phones. Others held hands. Alexandria stepped in. The room rose, not because a clerk ordered it but because they wanted to. She sat. No robe this time. Just Alexandria. Just the truth. Before the clerk could speak, she raised her hand. This court is now in session. She nodded to her assistant, who began passing out thick binders. These documents, Alexandria said, include all prior complaints filed against Deputy Carl Breener, all corresponding suppression directives, and the names of every individual who signed off on their dismissal. The defense attorney stood abruptly. Objection, Your Honor, this is. Sit down, she said without raising her voice. The gallery held its breath. Let the record show, Alexandria continued, that this court is no longer in the business of protecting institutions over individuals. We are done pretending silence is neutrality. She tapped the edge of her gavel on the wood. Every signature in this file, she said, represents a choice, not a mistake, a decision to protect predators and silence victims. From the back of the room a man rose. Gray hair. Worn hands. Trembling voice. Your Honor. Alexandria turned toward him. My name is Henry Clay. In 2011 I was arrested in this building. Breener slammed me into a wall after I raised my voice about my daughter's case. Broke 2 ribs. I filed a complaint. They said I tripped and fell. That's what the report says. He looked around. But I'm here now. Alexandria stood slowly. Anyone else? A beat. Then a hand. Then 2. Then 10. Then 30. One by one people began to rise. No lawyers. No subpoenas. Just witnesses. Just truth. And Alexandria didn't stop them. Because the courtroom wasn't just a chamber of justice anymore. It was a resurrection. It rained the next morning. Not a gentle spring shower, but a cleansing downpour. The kind of storm that made people stay indoors, cancel plans, skip court. But not today. By 8:30 a.m., the steps of the Travis County Federal Courthouse were packed. Students, elders, clergy, teachers, retired postal workers, young mothers with children, picket signs, umbrellas bent sideways by the wind. And still they came. Not to protest. To witness. Inside, the courtroom was standing room only. Phones streamed live. Reporters whispered into microphones wrapped in plastic sleeves. A young girl near the front clutched a notebook that said "Protect Black Women" in bold, uneven handwriting. The doors opened. Judge Alexandria Hayes stepped in. And without instruction, everyone stood. Not out of duty. Out of respect. She wore no scarf. No wig. No apology. Her bare, even scalp glistened faintly under the lights. The burns from the clippers had begun to scab, but her eyes were clear. Her spine, iron. She took her seat. Adjusted the mic. We are ready to proceed. The clerk called the next name. Tanya Greer, she said again, this time from the stand, her voice more composed than the day before. Before I continue, I want to make something clear. Alexandria gave a slight nod. I stayed silent for years because I believed in the myth of this place. That we had to protect its image at all costs. That if we didn't, justice itself would break. But that wasn't true. Her voice grew firmer. The image was already broken. We just kept shining the wrong light on it. She pointed to the binder in front of the prosecutor. Every signature in there represents a person who chose safety over truth. And every one of those choices cost someone their dignity. Alexandria didn't speak. She didn't need to. Because silence, when grounded in truth, is not weakness. It's authority. The next witness was called. Camille Hayes, the clerk announced. Heads turned. Alexandria's younger sister stepped through the courtroom doors, carrying a small black bag. She walked with grace, not performance. She wasn't here for the cameras. She stopped beside the bench, reached into the bag, pulled out a stool. Permission to approach, Your Honor? Alexandria exhaled, the closest thing to a smile flickering at the corners of her mouth. Granted. Camille plugged in a small set of clippers. The sound of the buzz was no longer harsh. Not this time. No humiliation. No fear. This was a choice. Before the entire courtroom, she began to shave away the remaining jagged strands of Alexandria's hair. Every pass of the clippers rewrote the narrative. From violence to victory. From shame to strength. When she finished, she handed Alexandria a mirror. The judge stared at her reflection. Her scalp was clean even. Her gaze, unflinching. You could rock that every day and still own every room, Camille whispered. Alexandria didn't reply. This, she said softly, is who I am now. No, Camille said. This is who you've always been. Now the world just caught up. And the room, without being told, stood again. Because in that moment they weren't just looking at a judge. They were looking at a movement. By noon the news had crossed state lines. Federal courthouses in Georgia, Louisiana, and Illinois had begun quietly reviewing their own complaint files. The term Hayes Protocol had trended on social media for 6 straight hours. And still, Alexandria sat behind the bench like a pillar. Unshaken. Unmoving. Unrelenting. Next witness, the prosecutor announced. A tall, broad-shouldered black man entered. Early 50s. Limp in his right leg. No badge, but you could see the years of service in the way he carried himself. He raised his hand. Sworn. Saturday. Name for the record? Andrew Taylor, he said. Former U.S. Marshal. Worked in this courthouse from 2004 to 2012. Did you work with Deputy Carl Breener? Taylor nodded slowly. Yes, I did. Did you witness any misconduct? The room quieted again. I saw things, he said. Didn't always name them as such. It started small. Language. Attitude. Rough pat-downs. Random searches. He looked down. But it got worse. And I said nothing. I didn't want to be the angry black officer. I didn't want to be a problem. His voice cracked, not from weakness, from regret. I filed one report, he added. Back in 2010. Internal Affairs. It disappeared. When I asked, they said Breener was the kind of man we need for difficult people. A few gasps. No rebuttals. No defense. Taylor leaned forward. When I saw what happened to you, Judge Hayes, I didn't sleep for 2 nights. Because I knew. I'd seen it coming. And I didn't stop it. Alexandria met his gaze. Steady. Compassionate. You're speaking now, she said. That matters. He nodded once. Then stepped down. And again the room stood. Not by order. But by instinct. That evening, Alexandria walked through the courthouse halls without her robe. Again by choice. But this time people didn't stare. They nodded. A janitor in green coveralls gave her a subtle fist-to-chest salute. A young clerk whispered, "Thank you." She entered courtroom 4A. The gallery rose once more. Because something irreversible had taken root. This courthouse wasn't what it used to be. And it never would be again. The storm outside had passed, but inside the Travis County Federal Courthouse, a different kind of pressure had built. It wasn't chaos. It was anticipation. Like the whole building knew something was about to shift. Again. Judge Alexandria Hayes entered courtroom 4A just after 2 p.m. The room, already full, turned completely silent. Not even the usual coughs, rustles, or shifting of chairs dared break the air. This silence wasn't fear. It was reverence. She took her seat slowly. No robe yet. Just the same black blazer she wore the morning she was assaulted. The scalp beneath her silver and black coils was now fully bare. Even clean. Worn not as a scar, but as a statement. The clerk stood. Next witness, Denise Talley. A quiet gasp echoed. People remembered her. She had been a fixture of the records department for years, kind, soft-spoken, always polite. But no one had ever truly seen her. Until now. Denise stepped forward, blazer pressed, notes in hand. She raised her right hand, took the oath, and sat down with a quiet strength that filled the room more than volume ever could. Miss Talley, the prosecutor began, what was your role at this courthouse? I worked in records. Nearly 18 years. Started as a file clerk. Became assistant supervisor before I left. Were you aware of any complaints filed against Deputy Carl Briner during your time? Denise nodded. Yes. 12 formal. At least twice that number unofficially. And what happened to those complaints? She hesitated. Looked toward Alexandria. Then down at her lap. They were erased. Marked as resolved. Sent to archive and never logged. The prosecutor stepped forward. Erased by whom? Judge Samuel Prescott, she said. Sometimes directly. Sometimes through the chief clerk. And the reasoning? Denise's voice broke for the first time. He said, it would make the courthouse look weak. That the public wouldn't understand. That it would undermine order. Alexandria sat still, her face unreadable. But behind her eyes, fire burned. Because those words weren't abstract to her. She had heard them in chambers. In interviews. At luncheons. Behind closed doors where good men protected their legacy with lies. Miss Talley, the prosecutor asked, why didn't you speak sooner? Denise paused. Because I was told not to. Because every time I did, I was warned. Not overtly. But I knew. I was told, this isn't the fight you want. She looked up directly at Judge Hayes. But now I know it was always the fight. I just didn't have backup until you. Alexandria nodded, once. Quietly. Deeply. Thank you, Miss Talley. The gallery remained silent, but the energy shifted again. Stronger. Denser. Like the room itself had stopped being a courtroom and become something else. A mirror. That night, Alexandria returned to her chambers and found another envelope. No note. No explanation. Just a single manila folder slipped under her door. Inside were personnel records. Email printouts. Call logs. Dozens of them. All tied to one man. Judge Samuel Prescott. At the bottom of the folder was a memo she hadn't seen before. A handwritten note from Prescott to the head of courthouse security. Dated 2018. Briner is firm but effective. Keeps the agitators in check. Especially with the younger ones and minorities. We can't afford another headline. Best to let him handle it his way. Alexandria didn't cry. She didn't scream. She didn't even move for a full minute. Then she whispered, more to herself than to the room, you didn't protect justice. You buried it. The next morning the courthouse was buzzing again, but not with business. With purpose. People moved differently. Straighter. Sharper. The marble floor echoed like a cathedral. At 9 a.m. sharp, Judge Hayes took the bench. The court will now proceed with final review of the newly submitted records. The prosecution began reading summaries aloud. It was worse than anyone imagined. Dozens of complaints rewritten. Shredded. Marked as incomplete, or informal, and tossed in internal limbo. And at the top of nearly every document? Prescott's signature. After 20 minutes, Alexandria raised a hand. I would like to enter a statement of principle into the record. She lifted a thick binder from beside her desk. I believe the justice system was never broken. Because you can't break what was never whole. The room fell utterly still. But I believe it can be built. Rebuilt. Not with silence. Not with ceremony. But with truth. She held the binder higher. This is the Hayes Protocol. It mandates comprehensive anti-bias training, quarterly psychological evaluations, and a zero-tolerance policy for any discriminatory behavior within any federal courthouse under this circuit. Some in the gallery nodded. Some blinked back emotion. Others simply listened, knowing history doesn't always announce itself with fireworks. This isn't a suggestion, Alexandria said. It's a standard. And I will take it to the full circuit, the Judiciary Committee, and if needed, Congress. She paused. Because what happened to me should never happen to anyone. A long silence followed. Then the defense attorney stood slowly, face tight. Your Honor, he said, the defense moves to suspend proceedings on grounds of judicial bias. Given your public victimization, we question the impartiality of this court. A low murmur of disbelief rippled through the crowd. Alexandria rose. Not quickly. Deliberately. She stepped down from the bench. Robe flowing behind her like a shadow made of steel. You're suggesting that because I was publicly assaulted, I cannot carry out my duty? With respect, Your Honor, the appearance of bias. No, she interrupted softly. Let's talk about appearance. She walked to the center of the room, turned slowly to face the gallery, her exposed scalp glowing under the fluorescent lights. Because of how I looked, I was deemed a threat. I was stripped, humiliated, my badge ignored, my identity erased. She looked directly at the defense attorney. But I came to this bench anyway. I followed the law. I upheld justice. Her eyes scanned the gallery. And I'm still here. Not a soul dared move. This court will not be recused, she said. If you intend to appeal, I will provide the paperwork myself. She returned to her seat. Now, call your next witness. The room, stunned into silence, did exactly what it always does in the face of undeniable truth. It obeyed. By early afternoon, the courthouse had transformed from a center of routine bureaucracy into the epicenter of a national awakening. The gallery was now packed beyond legal capacity. Clerks brought in folding chairs. Reporters live-streamed from corners. Courtroom 4A had become more than a room, it was a reckoning ground. Outside, the courthouse steps overflowed with people standing shoulder to shoulder. Some held signs. Others held silence. All held presence. Inside, Judge Alexandria Hayes didn't wear the robe. She didn't need it anymore. Her authority wasn't woven into fabric. It was carved into her every word, every step, every glance. The court calls Mr. Lewis Bryant, the clerk announced. A hushed ripple moved through the gallery as a frail black man in his 60s stepped forward. He wore a modest brown coat, and his hands shook as he clutched a weathered hat. He raised his hand and took the oath. Your name for the record? The prosecutor asked. Lewis Bryant, he replied. I was arrested in this courthouse in 2011. By whom? Carl Briner. What were the circumstances? My daughter's case was dismissed. I raised my voice. I was upset. He slammed me into the wall. Broke 2 ribs. Was a complaint filed? Bryant nodded slowly. Filed it right at the front desk. They told me I slipped and fell. That's what the official report says. Alexandria leaned forward, her voice steady. But you're here now. Yes, Your Honor. I am. She nodded once, softly. Thank you, Mr. Bryant. She turned to the gallery. Anyone else? A beat of silence. Then a hand. Then 2. Then 10. Then 20. A sea of stories all rising at once. Some came forward. Some stood quietly. But every raised hand told the same truth. They had been waiting to be seen. And now they were. Alexandria looked across the room. Not with pity, but with fire. You are heard, her eyes seemed to say. You are believed. Then she stood. There is one final matter before we close, she said, reaching under her desk to retrieve a folder thicker than any before. This is a formal policy proposal to be submitted to the Federal Judicial Council and the Senate Judiciary Committee. She held it up. It will become law or it will become war. No one moved. It is called the Hayes Protocol. You've heard of it. But now it has teeth. She opened the binder. It includes mandatory anti-bias training for all courthouse personnel, quarterly psychological evaluations for deputies and security staff, an independent, civilian-led review board for all future complaints, and most critically, a zero-tolerance policy for any discriminatory actions in any federal courthouse. She paused. Let the weight settle. This is not about politics. It's about people. It's about finally saying, not here. Not anymore. She scanned the faces in the gallery. Students, lawyers, survivors, skeptics, dreamers. You may not trust institutions anymore, she said. But maybe, just maybe, you can trust people who refuse to let those institutions crush us. She tapped the cover of the binder once. I'm not asking permission. Then she turned to the side entrance and gave a single nod. The doors opened. Deputy Carl Briner entered in shackles. No badge. No belt. No uniform. Just an orange jumpsuit and a blank, defeated stare. He was led forward and positioned at the front of the courtroom, beneath the very bench from which he once believed he held power. Alexandria didn't gloat. Didn't smile. She looked at him like a surgeon looks at a tumor. Cold. Precise. Unapologetically necessary. Mr. Briner, she said, voice clear. This court sentences you to 12 years in federal prison. 6 years for abuse of power. 5 years for civil rights violations. 1 additional year for obstruction of justice. She paused. But that is only the legal part. The room leaned in. Here is the human part. She rose. You spent your career deciding who was worthy of respect. who deserved dignity. You believed the badge made you immune. That silence would protect you. That people like me would never sit where I now sit. Her voice didn't rise. It didn't have to. Well now, she said, you will sit in the seat you created for others. No robe. No power. Just the weight of your choices. She turned to the marshals. Take him away. Breener didn't speak. Didn't struggle. He vanished through the side door, watched not by the court, but by history. Alexandria returned to her seat and tapped the gavel once. Court is adjourned. But no one moved. They didn't rush out. Didn't chatter. They lingered. Quiet. Reverent. Like they had just watched something sacred. And maybe they had. Back in chambers, Alexandria sat alone. No robe. No binder. Just the woman. Her phone buzzed with messages. National headlines. Senate interest. White House calls. But she didn't check them. Because this moment was hers. The knock came gently. It was Camille. She didn't speak. Just smiled and held up the same clippers she had used days before. You ready? She asked. Alexandria nodded. Let's even it out. No cameras. No audience. Just two sisters and the truth. Camille worked slowly. Carefully. Every pass not an erasure but a ritual. When it was done, Alexandria looked in the mirror. She didn't see a victim. She saw a woman forged in fire. This time she smiled. This, she said, is who I am now. No, Camille whispered. This is who you've always been. The world just finally caught up. That night, Alexandria walked out of the courthouse without a hat, scarf, or fear. On the sidewalk, a crowd had gathered. No chants. No slogans. Just presence. A woman in her 70s stepped forward, hand trembling. I never thought I'd live to see someone like you do what you just did, she whispered. Alexandria took her hand gently. You didn't just live to see it, she said. You survived so I could do it. Behind her, a teenage girl removed her hoodie, revealing a freshly shaved head. No words. Just a nod. Alexandria nodded back. Something passed between them, not a moment but a legacy. And it was just beginning. Because justice didn't end in that courtroom. It began there. And now, it was walking into the world. What you've just heard isn't just a story, it's a truth too many have lived and too few have told. Judge Alexandria Hayes stood in the fire and did what so many fear. She didn't just demand justice, she delivered it. This isn't about one courthouse, one bad cop, or one ruling. It's about every time silence was enforced, dignity was stolen, and justice was delayed. But not anymore. Here at True Echo we bring you stories that cut deep, challenge the powerful, and echo long after the video ends. If this story moved you, if it made you feel seen, if it made you furious, if it made you hope, then don't just click away. Subscribe to True Echo. Leave a comment. Tell us where you're watching from and what this story meant to you. Share this video with someone who still believes the system can't change. Because stories like this, they don't end when the gavel drops. They begin when we choose to echo them.